Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our advanced training class. This is class number 2 of our 7-week series here on Monday, August 12th, 2019. Of course, Mike Rich is hosting this training this morning from the Dallas, Texas area. And just want to welcome all of you. Glad that you could join us here this morning. And we've already been well fed. We had Mr. Alistair Edwards speak on our group call this morning, our B2B support call, and I think he did just a phenomenal job. I really enjoyed his perspective and thought his training was just fantastic. And we've got a lot to get into today. We've got some important topics to cover, and I want to first and foremost just thank everyone who took the homework assignment seriously last week, and it's been awesome to be able to throughout the week receive your game plans and your action plans, and to be able to see some of your goals. I really appreciate that many of you really went into some depth, and I love how so many of you got personal with those goals. When you talk about things that you want to accomplish, for many of those action plans, I saw where it got beyond a dollar figure, or an amount of money, or amount of a measurable result. And not that shouldn't be part of your action plan, because it should, and it is. For many of you, you talked about some of those measurable results. I want to hit executive director, and many of you had those time bound as well. I want to hit executive director within the next 90 days or within the next 60 days or by a certain date. And that was certainly fantastic to see. But again, so many of you got beyond that. What does that really mean for you in your life? And you were able to open up a little bit and share some things that are very personal to you. And I won't read those. I'm not going to share those as far as the training goes, and frankly, I don't have your permission to, so I wouldn't do that without your permission. And some of those are very personal to you, and you'll share those at a time that you feel is right for you with other people. But I appreciate you having confidence that you can share that with me. I want you to know that I'm 100% behind you in accomplishing those goals. And again, I want to thank you for taking so much time and putting so much effort into developing an action plan that is personalized to you, a list of goals that is personalized to you, that means something to you. I saw a few people send like a mission statement, and I think that's powerful. That's something that if you'll take time and really focus on developing a short mission statement, kind of a statement that describes what you are wanting to accomplish. And the mission statement can kind of include that overarching goal, or maybe plural overarching goals. But it can also include some of the how-tos on how to get there, at least in a general sense. And I would just encourage you, if you haven't done that, to maybe put that together as part of your plan as well, a mission statement. And then that mission statement, as well as that action plan, it will do you very little good if all you did was prepare that and send it to me, because I'm not the one that puts it into action. The question is, how often are you going to review that? How often are you going to come back to that? And like that mission statement, for example, can you hang it on your wall right next to where you sit every day? And can that be in front of you? And are you going to take time to actually read through it with some emotion every day? I mean, the action plan ought to be reviewed, in my opinion, at least every week. But I don't think it's a bad idea to review it every day, especially for your first few weeks of putting it into action. Read through some of those goals that you have. Read through and let that be a reminder to you why you're doing what you do today. If today your goal is to pick up the phone and make some prospecting calls for 2.5 hours, if that's going to be your goal, read through your goals, your outcomes, your desired outcomes before you do that. Let that be your motivating factor. Let those things that are very personal to you And some of you shared some beautiful things that were very personal to you, and I could feel, even though I wasn't talking to you face to face, I could feel that you meant it. I could feel that there's a genuine and real desire to accomplish these things. Well, let that motivate you. Let that be a motivating factor as to why you're not going to stop before your 2.5 hours is up. If your goal is to make 50 calls, why you won't stop at 45. In fact, some of you, that's going to motivate you to go a little beyond 50. And your goal is 50, but you're going to do 51 and 52 and 53. And I've learned that when you do that, don't be surprised when on that 52nd or 53rd or 54th call, even though your goal was 50, but you didn't stop, you just pushed a little bit harder, and all of a sudden on that 52nd, 53rd, 54th call, you make a decision maker meeting. You set up another appointment. And I don't know why that works. It tends to work that way, but I've seen it so many times in 17 years that I have to acknowledge that it's real. That when you and I are willing to go a little above and beyond, the reward is not necessarily linear. It's not in step with that. You just get much bigger results. I can't explain it. It's not scientific, but I've seen it enough to be able to acknowledge that it's real. So thank you again for sending those to me. And really, it wasn't so much sending them to me that matters, but it's thank you for taking the time to do it. And I would just encourage you to keep those in front of you, review them extremely regularly, let that become a powerful force in your life, and then tweak them, right? I mean, that was another part of what we talked about last week is you're going to have to tweak that plan. A rocket ship doesn't take off and just automatically land on the moon. It's off track 97% of the time, but it lands in the right spot because it's making those constant course corrections. That's what you're going to need to do. You're going to need to make those constant course corrections. Just constantly kind of find your way back in. And if your plan, for example, said that you plan to or that you anticipate closing 1 out of every 4 decision maker meetings, and you get out and you start doing decision maker meetings and you find that it's really not 1 out of 4, maybe you're 1 out of 6 that you're closing on the spot, adjust your plan, make that tweak. That's important. Again, once you have the roadmap, if I leave out of Dallas and I want to go to Disneyland, once I have the roadmap, that sets me on the right track. At least I know where I'm going and I've got a plan on how to get there. But when I'm on I-40 and all of a sudden it's shut down because of an accident or because of a detour of some type, I don't throw away the map. I don't throw away the plan. I certainly don't throw away my destination. I don't say, well, sorry, kids, we're not going to Disneyland. I just find another way. I just tweak it. I just, I follow a detour. And don't be afraid to do that with your plan as well. I'll share one more kind of note on this, and then I want to review some of those plans that we had started talking about last week. I remember I went to a training one time, and the speaker said, I want you to take out your pen and paper. I'm going to give you 30 seconds, and I want you to write down your top 3 goals. Go. And I started to write. I started to think, and then I started to write. And he called it at 30 seconds. He said, okay, time. And as you can imagine, most people in the room had not been able to, in 30 seconds, write down your top 3 goals. He said, I know that 30 seconds is a short amount of time. But here's the thing. If you had to do any thinking as part of that, if you had to stop and say, what are my top 3 goals? You are not reviewing your goals often enough. That should require 0 thought because that ought to be a part of your thinking automatically. It's kind of like if I say I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic, you finish the next phrase. You don't have to think about that. It's to the republic for which it stands. It's not, really what republic is that? And what is the relationship of the flag and the republic? I'm not saying that putting thought into it is bad. It's good to think about these things. But when it comes to being able to speak it, there's not a whole lot of thought in that. You just know it automatically. And I hope that at some point your goals can become that that automatic as well. And again, I want to be real clear. I'm not saying that you could just go through them without any thought or emotion, or I mean, I hope it does carry emotion. Frankly, I hope that if you and I have a chance to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance, I hope that that carries with it some emotion and some meaning in what we're saying, that we ought to be able to speak with purpose. But your goals ought to be that automatic, where it just comes out because you're reviewing them so often, because they're a part of your daily planning, because they're a part of you. And that was a great lesson for me. I remember I felt a little bit chastened that day. I felt like, I'm not there. And I had to double back and really make a bigger commitment to my goals and making that a part of my daily planning and daily life. So, again, thank you very much to all of you that have done that. I'm so excited now to move into week number 2, and I want to start just kind of on that same topic of these action plans, and again, just as a reminder, if you'll if you have questions during what we're talking about here, if you'll just type those in the question bar. I don't see those as they come up, and so I'll wait till the end and we'll cover those questions. So don't feel like I'm trying to ignore you or anything like that. But that way we can just kind of do the Q&A in the last 15, 20 minutes, and we'll kind of bust through this great information today. Today we're talking about some of this. I mean, really, not even some. I'm going to say the number one thing that helps you be successful. And I say that with a little bit of hesitation, because the mindset factor that we talked about last week, having the right mindset and the right goals, is such a big part of that, and it really has to be the foundation. But the number one thing that you and I do to be successful, that's what we're going to get in today. And I really do believe that with all my heart. Do you remember last week we talked about kind of this action plan, and I laid out kind of a sample action plan for earning $100,000 a year. And I said, if that's kind of your goal, then you start with the end in mind, and you just kind of work backwards, and you say, well, $100,000 a year would be about 50 sales a month. And if I want to write 50 sales a month and my closing ratio is 50%, so if I get in front of employees, 50% of them is my average sign-up rate. That's my closing ratio. Then in order to write 50, obviously I would have to get in front of 100 per month. If I want to get in front of 100 employees per month, if I figure kind of an average group size of 25, then I would need to open 4 new groups a month. Now, that's not always going to be an exact science, because sometimes you'll write 1 new group and get in front of 100 employees. Sometimes you'll write 4 new groups and you won't quite get in front of 100 employees. Maybe you got in front of 70. So that won't be necessarily an exact science, but I'm just trying to get an action plan here. If my roadmap says I'm going to drive 4 hours between this city and this city, and that's where I'm going to take my bathroom break, if at 2 hours my body tells me differently, and my body's saying you need to pull over and find an exit, and we're going to take a bathroom break, I don't throw away the whole plan. It doesn't mess me up that much. I just have to be flexible for that. Well, same thing here. But if my goal is to open up 4 groups a month, then and my closing ratio with decision makers, and that's a big number that we'll focus on throughout this advanced training. But if that's my closing ratio is 25% or 1 out of 4, then I'm going to have to get in front of 16 decision makers. This is a review. We talked about all this last week. And if I want to get in front of 16 decision makers this month, then that's going to take, if I'm cold calling and my ratio is 1 out of 50 calls, I make an appointment, I know I've got to do 800 calls. And again, we're not quite done because we're not back to daily activity. And that's always the goal, is to get it back to daily activity. But if I want to make 800 calls a month and I'm going to make calls 20 days a month, then that's 40 calls per day that I'm going to have to make. So this should look familiar to you. This is the plan that I had shown you last week, kind of just, again, as a sample plan. Well, I want to show you a little variation here, because this won't be everybody's plan, and thankfully, it's not everybody's plan, because I've seen now many of you sent me your plan, and so I've seen that, and I've been able to look at them, and I'm so glad that the vast majority of you listened to me last week as I implored you not to just regurgitate what I had already given you. And so many of you did put some personalization and some thought into that. Let me just show you a little bit of variation. Let's say, for example, you look at that and say, that looks like a good plan, but $100,000 is not enough for me. Maybe my goal needs to be $200,000 in yearly income. Well, let's just kind of take the same steps backwards. If my goal is $200,000, basically everything is going to double. I'm going to need to write 100 plans per month. That means I need to get in front of 200 employees per month. I need to open, in order to do that, 8 groups per month, or maybe I adjust that because I'm counting on a little bit larger groups. I don't know, but if we still figured on getting in front of 25 people per group, then I would need to open 8 groups a month, meaning that I would need to do 32 decision maker meetings per month, meaning that I would need to make 1,600 calls per month, which is 80 calls a day. And some of those may look very overwhelming. Maybe some of you look at 1,600 calls and say, man, I don't know how I could do it. But really, 80 calls a day, that's not that overwhelming. I mean, if you make 25 an hour, which that's aggressive, 20 to 25 an hour is aggressive, but it's not unheard of. It's not unbelievable. If you were really making calls and not, sitting there for 2 or 3 minutes between each call, working up the courage to pick up the phone again, if you were really making calls, you could definitely get 80 calls, or 20 to 25 in an hour. And so 80 would only take you 3 or 4 hours. It's not a full day of making calls. You'd still have plenty of time to do those decision maker meetings and do those enrollments. And now it would be an aggressive schedule, don't get me wrong. I'm going to show you in a little bit here kind of some sample weekly schedules. This would be an aggressive one. But if that was your goal, this is what it would need to look like. Now, could you pad that by doing some other things? Yes, and that's what I'm about to show you. It doesn't necessarily have to be this aggressive to earn $200,000 a year, and here's why. To keep this simple, let's go back to the number that I showed you last week. So we're going back here to if $100,000 a year was our goal. Let me show you one other variation that is one that is definitely, that should be part of almost everyone's plan. And Alistair Edwards this morning definitely spoke to this as well. Again, I mentioned to you that this game plan right here is really for cold calling. This is cold market prospecting. This is not taking into account getting referrals from anybody. It's not taking into account using any of your warm market to set any of these appointments up. This would be a game, if I was purely cold calling, this would be what the numbers would have to look like for me to earn $100,000 a year. Well, the good news is nobody has to purely cold call. Now, I'm not against cold calling in any way, shape, or form. I thought it was funny this morning how Mr. Edwards said, in his opinion, cold calling is a punishment for not getting a referral. That's not a bad way to look at it. But at the end of the day, I don't know that I necessarily like the word punishment because I've done a lot of cold calling. I don't know that I was punishing myself. The reality is that helped me open a lot of groups. So I'm not anti-cold calling in any way, shape, or form. However, I just want to show you the difference of what this type of action plan might look like if you're warm calling, if you're calling your warm market list. And let's just kind of examine some of these numbers here. Now, notice the income at the end of the year is the same. That $100,000 hasn't changed. And really, if you take a step back, the 50 sales hasn't changed. If you take one more step back, that 50% closing ratio hasn't really changed. Because, if you go into your best friend's company, if your best friend owns a company and he or she brings you in, the employees still have to make a buying decision. They still have to sign up. And they don't really care if the owner is your best friend. I mean, the vast majority of them, that's not gonna persuade them one way or the other. So those bottom, and really to get in front of 100, if you're working the same size of group, the 4 groups per month doesn't really change. Where we're gonna see a big variance here is in the front end of this. For example, this ratio right here. If you make 40 calls per month into your warm market, Instead of, well, if you make any calls to your warm market, look at the difference in that ratio, 1 out of 5 versus cold market ratio. If it takes you 50 calls, cold calls, to set one decision maker meeting, you're going to find in your warm market that is dramatically better, to the point where it might be 10 times better. I mean, 1 out of 5 is much more realistic if you're working in a real warm market. Like, for example, what Mr. Edwards shared on the phone this morning, if you're getting referrals, and he gave some great language about getting referrals. He talked about going to a school principal and saying, okay, who was your mentor? Who was the person that kind of mentored you to become a principal? And where are they the principal at? And could you call them and let them know that we just had a good experience and that I'd like to come talk to them? Who have you mentored? Who's a principal today because you helped mentor them? Where are they working? And would you mind calling them? Who are some of your vendors? In short, and this is my favorite question that he said, who do you know that would say yes to me coming in? I mean, that's a great way to phrase it. Who do you know that would say yes to me coming in and talking to their employees? I love that language. Mike Scott's one of our associates up in Ohio who does just a brilliant job of getting these referrals. He just takes time to ask for referrals. He just and it doesn't matter if he's sitting down with the decision maker, whether they say yes or whether they say no, doesn't really matter. I mean, it does at the end of the day, but it doesn't as far as him getting results, but it does not matter as far as him getting referrals. He's going to ask for referrals either way. And because of that, he's been able to open many groups now, primarily, and in fact, maybe even exclusively, by working in his warm market. And we've got several people that I could highlight that have been able to do the exact same thing. They just get referrals. Well, think about that. Going back to our screen here, think about that. If you're calling a guy that just got an email or just got a phone call from someone that he mentored or who was mentored by him, and they say, I want you to talk to this associate. We just did this and it was really good. Do you not think that 1 out of 5 is reasonable? If you call that person and say, can I come in and sit down with you? In fact, I'm going to say 1 out of 5 in that type of situation would be terrible, because it's probably going to be 5 out of 5 that you're able to set the appointment with. Now, I say 1 out of 5 because warm market isn't always that warm. Sometimes warm market, and we'll talk about this morning, but sometimes your warm market is your next door neighbor works for ABC Company and says, you ought to call our HR person. Her name is Dolores, and here's her number. And maybe that's going to be closer to 1 out of 5 times that you make that call, you're going to get the appointment. But look at the difference between 1 out of 5 and 1 out of 50. And then here's the other place that you're going to see a big difference. When you're meeting with those decision makers, as far as closing them and getting their group set up, that may not be 100% of the time, but it's going to be better than if it's just a cold call. If they already know that you've had a positive experience, if they already have some trust with you, if you're a customer of theirs, where they're incentivized to listen to you, it's probably going to have a positive impact on the number of groups that you are able to close out of those decision makers as well. So just look at that warm market prospecting, and if you kind of start at the front of that, if you say, you know what, I'm going to make 10 calls to my warm market every Tuesday, I'm just throwing that out there as a sample goal. But because of that, that's going to be 40 calls a month. I would anticipate getting in front of 8 decision makers a month, opening up 4 of those groups, getting in front of 100 employees. That's another way. And this is something that if I was part-time, and you kind of heard Mr. Edwards talk about that this morning, if I was part-time, if I had a full-time job, but maybe I could take Tuesdays off, this is what my 6-figure game plan would look like. Now, most people are going to combine some cold and some warm and do some of both. That's, most associates, it's going to be some combination of what you see on the screen. I just want to show you some variation. I just want to show you the plan that we looked at, the one that's on top of your screen right now. That's the one that we looked at last week. That's not the only way. Again, you can adjust the number on the back end. You can certainly adjust some of those ratios based on if you're working in your warm market or not. So I hope that that's helpful for you. One thing that I would encourage you to make a part of your goals, and this was something that some of you had. This was something, though, that I think that many of you, in reviewing your goals, many of you could add this and be more specific on what I'm about to share with you here, and that is action statements. So action statements when it comes to your goals. Again, having the results there is good. That helps, again, maintain the vision. That helps keep us motivated. But what action statements are you including as part of your goals? And here are just some examples. I will develop a list of 50 warm market contacts. Now, that's something that once you have that, you can check it off. I will develop a list of 50 warm market contacts. I will call each of these warm market contacts until I either have an appointment or a DM tells me no. What another great action statement that you could put as part of your goals. The reason I like action statements, again, there's power in writing them, there's power in rereading them, and it's specific, and it's action related. So the results are good when you say, I want to write $1,400 in premium. I want to get to executive director before October. I want to make a six-figure income. I want to make $100,000 between now and June 1st of next year. Those result-oriented statements are good, but you don't have 100% control over that just coming into fruition, over that just happening. What I like about action statements like this is that you have 100% control over that. Whether or not you make a list of 50 warm market contacts has nothing to do with whether people tell you yes or no. I mean, that is 100% on you. Whether you call each of those until you either have an appointment or a DM tells you no, you see how that works? That's 100% on you. You have full control. That's why I like these action goals, these action statements. I like this statement. Contacting these warm market contacts is a priority in my business, or I will make that a priority in my business. I will make 20 calls per day in my warm market for the next 5 weeks. There's another time-bound, action-related goal that someone could set. I'm just giving you some samples here. I will supplement this activity by making 20 cold calls a day, or calls a day to cold market prospects for the next 5 weeks. After 5 weeks, I will increase my cold market calls to 40 a day. Or maybe that doesn't change. But again, I'm just trying to get you to think bigger and think more specifically as to what your action plan is going to look like. So the action plan doesn't just have to be the chart that I showed you, right? The progression. It can be statements as well. I like this one. I'll obtain 5 referrals each week from decision makers that I meet with. Let me tell you, somebody does that, they won't have to increase their cold calls from 20 to 40 a day because they'll be getting enough decision makers from those referrals. What a great action statement. I will always call, this is a great one, I will always call on 10 neighboring businesses before or after each DM meeting. I just want you to think about that. When you walk out of a DM meeting, turn left and turn right. Go get the 5 companies on the left and go get the 5 companies on the right. Now you'd have to budget time for that. But what more powerful approach could you take than, hey, I just met with John over there next door to you. I wanted to stop by while I was in the area. You know, especially if you got a gift and you could drop a gift off to that decision maker. You go hit 10 companies, 5 on the left, 5 on the right. Coming out of every decision maker meeting, I guarantee you will set up some decision maker meetings from that. I mean, I don't think you could help but set up some DM meetings from that. I like this third one. I'll visit in-person 8 businesses in my warm market each day for the next 5 weeks. Again, we're talking there, we're getting into some specifics on whether I'm going to be on the phone or whether I'm going to do it in person or both. You can do both. And I will supplement those visits with 8 visits to cold market companies over the next 5 weeks as well. So again, I'm just trying to give you some sample action statements. So action related, in other words, statements that have to do with things that you are going to do. Many of these are in your control. I mean, they're 100% in your control. You either are going to do them or you're not. But if you'll just take time and write statements like these down as part of your list, and again, or not part of as part of your plan. And again, many of you did, but many of you did not. Many of you, it was just kind of a chart-looking thing. And I like action statements. It helps you really realize, are you doing this or are you not? If you'll take the time to do that, I really believe that it will help. One final kind of recap thought, and then we're going to shift gears and get into today's real. Not that this is not a real topic, but our scheduled topic for today. I did a video a few months ago called "Organizing Your Weekly Schedule," and it's up in our Success Team back office. It was on the Group Scoop as well. And so if you go listen to the replays, that was back on May 13th, I think, that I had done that. But it's on the Success Team back office under the additional B2B training, and it's right there, organizing your weekly schedule. And I went through, and in that video, I won't recap the video because I think it would be worthwhile for you to go watch that. I will recap it. I'm not going to redo it. I'm not going to say everything I said on the video. But part of that is I went through and I kind of showed what was what does a sample weekly schedule really look like? What does a sample weekly schedule really look like? And I actually included there a PDF download of this sheet right here. And it's it's something that you could take and use. If you have one that you like to use on your own, that's fine as well. Some of you like to do that digitally. Some of you prefer to have it on paper. I do think that regardless of how you do it, I think that there's real value in having it right in front of you, being able to see your entire week. And I love how Mr. Edwards said that on our call this morning. He said, my advice for any associate is show me your calendar. I'll tell you if you're going to make money or not. Show me your calendar and what does it look like, and I'll be able to help you with that. So I've redone this weekly schedule, kind of give you an example of what this might look like this week. So you'll notice I've got our B2B conference call, and I'm doing this in Central Time because that's the time zone that I live in. So you might have to adjust this depending on your time zone, but we do that B2B conference call from 9 to 10 on Monday morning. I've added our webinar here from 10:30 to 12:30. That's 2 hours that I'm setting aside for a webinar. And then I would maybe start with this kind of general skeleton. So you'll kind of see here, I've set aside time that I'm going to do prospecting. And you'll see that, and I've color-coded this kind of based on the activity. So yellow is, those are things that are like training and things like that are on my schedule, or events that are on my schedule. Red is decision maker meetings and enrollment. Blue is prospecting. Green is follow-up. You don't have to use those colors by any means, but I'm just kind of giving you an example of what some of this might look like. And so I might start my week with this type of skeleton, I'll call it. Notice that I'm kind of I'm blocking off time for certain activities. Well, as I start to set decision maker meetings, and many of these decision maker meetings might have been set last week, but as I start to set decision maker meetings, my schedule is going to change. So you can see here where I've actually added 3 decision maker meetings that I've set up. So I've done that in those time slots that I left open for decision maker meetings. I don't always have control over that, but when I'm prospecting, if I get a decision maker on the phone, and you can kind of see there, Johnson Medical, I've got at 9:30 on Wednesday. If I call Big D Construction and I say, I've got to be at Johnson Medical at 9:30. They're not too far from you, so I'm going to be in your area. Could I stop by there at 11? Would that be okay? Or vice versa? I do have some influence. I won't say it's control, but I usually am able to at least influence when a decision maker meeting might be. If I know I've got to be at Johnson Medical at 9:30 and I'm eyeballing that 11 o'clock time slot, when I call Big D Construction, I might say, would 11 o'clock next Wednesday work for you? Now, it may or it may not, but that's how I have at least some influence. Now, let's look at Thursday. Thursday there, I've left open the morning basically for decision maker meetings and the afternoon for prospecting. Well, what if I call a company and I say, would Thursday morning around 10 work for you? And they say, no, I can't Thursday morning, but I can do it Thursday afternoon. Well, what do I do? Because I've blocked off time for prospecting on Thursday afternoon. And I want to be careful because I want to protect that time. I want to be careful that I'm prospecting, that I leave time for prospecting, that I set aside time for prospecting every week. At the same time, I don't want to tell that decision maker no. If they say I can do Thursday afternoon, I want to work with them, right? So what do? Well, I just switch those around. I just put my prospecting, boom, move that to Thursday morning. Now I'm able to take that decision maker or make that decision maker meeting. If they say I can do, 2 o'clock on Thursday afternoon, Daniel's Dental, boom, now I put that at 2. But you see how when I have my schedule in blocks like this, I can just move things around. I can change things. Again, I can be flexible, but starting with an idea of what the week's going to look like is good because it helps me budget the right amount of time for the best activities. And then again, I'm flexible. I just have to move things around. I'm still got time for my 200 prospecting calls if that's my goal. I still have time for my decision maker meetings. I have time to set other decision maker meetings as well. And maybe I don't have a screenshot of this, but maybe I don't move the entire prospecting up. Maybe I say, I can get done with that decision maker meeting and be back by 3:30 and still prospect for an hour that afternoon. Maybe I just do 2 hours of prospecting on Thursday morning. But again, I can budget that because I've got the skeleton. Then it's just a matter of filling in the pieces. And maybe I've moved some things around, but I preserve and protect the time that's dedicated to each activity. Now, I went and added some based on what Mr. Edwards said this morning, because I love how he said that he likes to highlight his income-producing activity in green. Now, you could choose any color you want to, but I know for him, green means money, and that's why he chose green. At least I would think that's his thinking there. So what is income-producing activity on this? Well, I've started by highlighting my decision-maker meetings. No question, that is income-producing activity. What else on this screen is income-producing activity? Well, my prospecting. I'm calling new companies there. When I say new companies, I'm calling companies that I've not yet spoken to. Now, it might be my 10th call to the same company, but it's still a new company because I so far have not gotten through. We'll talk about that a little bit more this morning. But that's income producing activity. I'm sharing the message, or at least attempting to share the message with someone that has not heard it before. That's different than these two sections of follow-up, okay? Follow-up is crucial to your business, and I've learned this: if you don't schedule time to follow up, sometimes it just doesn't get done. So I'm a big believer in scheduling time at the beginning of every week, having time budgeted for following up. And by the way, you'll see there one of those is in person, the other is over the phone. Brian Fahili has taught that many times. It's harder to say no to a set of eyeballs, so he likes to do his follow-up in person as much as possible. So that follow-up is crucial, it's important, it's necessary, it's essential. Figure out any other synonym there, it would fit. You got to do it. but I'm not going to consider that income producing activity because it's not sharing the message with a new person that hasn't heard it before. It's a crucial part of my business, but I'm going to make sure that every week I've got a big chunk of my time, and you can kind of see here, big chunk of my time set aside in green to income producing activity. I just want to kind of give you an idea of what that might look like. By the way, I'll send out a PDF of this in follow-up. I'll send you a PDF just so you don't have to go track that down. If you want to use this particular layout, if you already got your own layout that you already use, that's fine. But I'll send out a PDF of this sheet, blank, that you can use if you choose to. Now, what about that business briefing down on Thursday evening? I like what Mr. Edwards said this morning. He said you could highlight that in green if you bring a guest, right? Otherwise, it's not in green. But if you bring a guest, then that business briefing could be in green as well. So I hope that is helpful. And again, this is real stuff. This is what separates the winners from the losers, and this is what separates the producers from the pretenders. Is how organized are you going to be, and how are you going to fit that time in? And then at the end of the day, are you going to do that activity? Because you could set aside 3 hours and say, I'm going to make 50 phone calls in that 3 hours. But if you end up spending that 3 hours watching television, eating ice cream, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter how good the skeleton looks. Your bank account's going to eventually look like a skeleton if you're not willing to do some activity and actually put into action some of those goals that you set for yourself. I want to review here this employee benefit marketing process. Now, we spent a lot of time talking about this, but this process, this system, if you will, of constantly being, in front of new faces, sharing this message, this is the system that we follow to do it. If you and I want to go open new groups, if we want to enroll employees, this is the system. And there's some variation, as I look at some of our top trainers, they might share this a little bit differently, but I've always kind of liked this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. One, starting with getting a list of qualified leads. Because to me, you got to start with a list. What does your pipeline look like today? What does your lead list look like today? And so we're going to talk about that this morning. Step number 2, now once you have that list, you got to contact them. We call that prospecting, where you're calling companies on the phone or going into companies in person, and you're introducing yourself. You're trying to set up an appointment. If I'm calling them on the phone, all I'm trying to do is just set that appointment. I'm not trying to sell the program over the phone. I'm not trying to explain the benefits over the phone. All I'm doing is trying to set the appointment up with the decision maker with the decision maker. That DM meeting, that decision maker meeting, is step number 3. And what is my goal in that meeting is to move to step number 4. So this starts to kind of look like a funnel, where I've got a lot of leads in step 1. I'm going to prospect those leads, and I'm going to end up with a few decision maker meetings in step number 3. And then some of those, not all of them, but some of them will progress to that enrollment in step number 4. And then, of course, step number 5 is the account management step. That's where you're servicing those groups that you've already opened, that you're focusing on retention, not just selling members, but retaining members. All of that kind of fits under that step number 5 of this system. What I love about this system is it teaches you and me exactly what we need to be doing every day. There should never be a day where we wake up and wonder, what should I do? And again, if we're structured in our weekly schedule, that's just a way of manifesting what the system is supposed to do. But the system is what teaches you that. That's how you know how to build that skeleton in your weekly schedule. That's how you know what time to set aside for prospecting, and what kind of time to set aside for doing decision maker meetings and enrollments. It's because of this system. There should never be a time where we wake up wondering, what am I going to do today? If so, we have not properly planned, and we are not taking advantage of the system. So let's get into step number one here, which is that list, making this list of contacts. Um, I'm gonna do a poll here in just a minute. I'll start that poll, but I want to start by just talking about warm market contacts and cold market contacts, and then I'm actually gonna get interactive here. I'm gonna poll you on how many leads do you currently have, because that's gonna help us kind of as we move into step number two, which is prospecting. But again, warm market contacts, cold market contacts. I just want to kind of explain both. We've already talked about this morning, taking time and kind of working a plan around your warm market, working a plan around cold market. How much of your time are you dedicating to either one? There are some of you that are just starting out that if you look at what we've got on the screen here, and we're going to go through these, but if you look at that and if you take out resources like your cell phone contacts, if you take out your bank account statement and your credit card statement, you start looking at where you're spending money, you can get 20, 30, 40, 50, even 100 leads on your warm market list. Well, maybe for you, you don't even move to cold calling right now. You don't even incorporate cold calling into your action plan at this point because you've got a sufficient warm market list. You've got a substantial warm market list. Maybe others of you have been around for a while, you've kind of worked that warm market list and you'll continue to get referrals, but you say, you know what, I'm going to have to put some cold market into that as well. I'm going to have to supplement my warm by doing some cold, or maybe the majority at the beginning is going to be cold calling. Maybe that's what it looks like for you. I don't know. Everybody's case is different, but my job is to kind of show you what this looks like, and then your job is to make it, personalized for you. So when we talk about warm market, just some good questions here. Who do you know who owns a business? Take your cell phone contacts, go through them. Who do you know that owns a business? Who do you know that works in HR? Who do you know that works in management? Those top 3 bullet points are going to be a gold mine for you. Because if you've got a fellow church member or a neighbor who works in HR or who owns a business or who works in upper level management, they can fast track you in a company to getting a yes. That can be your secret, your ace in your deck. I'm forgetting the term there, but that's your shot. That's your fast track. They can get you a yes faster than almost anybody else. This 4th bullet point here, who takes your money? Who do you know who takes your money? In other words, where are you spending money? What businesses are you spending money? That's where I say take out your bank account statement and your credit card statement. Look through those. Where are you spending money? Whose customer are you? And customer won't always be the correct term, because sometimes it'll be, you're a patient. If it's a doctor's office or a dentist's office, maybe you're a client. But where are you spending money? We call that following your dollar. You better put those places on your warm market list as well. Now, sometimes that will be every bit as effective as knowing somebody who works in HR or works in management. Sometimes it won't be, but it can still help. I've shared this often before. I'll share it again here. My dry cleaner story. I didn't call him. I was picking up my dry cleaning one day, and I talked to the owner of this dry cleaning shop, and this was several years ago. But I said, hey, I wanted to. I'd love to take 15 minutes and come in and show you what I do. And that was it. That's all I said. I'd love to take 15 minutes and come in and show you what I do. And he said, his response was, well, I would not be interested. I didn't say anything. I didn't even say identity theft or legal, or I hadn't even mentioned any of that. All I said is I want to take 15 minutes and show you what I do. And he said, well, I wouldn't be interested. He may have been having a bad day. I don't know, because I thought it was kind of a curt response, but his name wasn't Kurt, but it was a curt response. He said, I wouldn't be interested. I said, well, and listen, I wish I had recorded it, because I don't remember exactly what I said, in the spirit of full disclosure. But I said something to the effect of, it doesn't really matter to me if you're interested or not, because right now I'm spending about $200 a month here on dry cleaning, and all I'm asking for is 15 minutes of your time. And if you're not willing to give me 15 minutes of your time, I'm confident that I can find another dry cleaner in town where the owner is willing to give me 15 minutes of his or her time. Now, again, I don't remember exactly how I said that, and I know myself well enough to know I tend to be a pretty nice guy. At least I think I am. So I don't think I said it exactly like that, but it was strong enough, and it was evident to him that I would take my business elsewhere if he was not willing to give me 15 minutes of his time. And it was strong enough that his next thing he said was, "Oh no, I would definitely be willing to sit down with you for 15 minutes." I mean, he switched gears as fast as I've ever seen somebody switch gears. He said, "No, I'd be happy to sit down with you. Well, good." And that's what I expect. If I'm spending money with you, you don't even have to say yes. You don't even have to buy what I'm selling. But you need to give me at least 15 minutes that I can explain it to you. That's my attitude. And don't be afraid to take that attitude to the real estate office that you worked with when you bought your home, or to your dentist office, or to your doctor, or to your dry cleaner, or to your CPA, or to your insurance agent. Don't be afraid to take that attitude into places where you're spending money. Again, not in a rude way. I'm not telling anybody go in there and say, "You either go and give me 15 minutes of your time or I'm walking out of here and you'll never see me again." That's not the approach that I'm recommending that you take. But don't be afraid to make that clear in a professional and tactful way. Another example is an insurance broker that I worked with, Walker Insurance. They had done my homeowners and my auto insurance. And I was really pleased with them. They were fantastic. They were really nice people. They had great customer service. Every time I called, they were right on the phone. I didn't have to search anybody or track anybody down. They sounded like a real reputable firm. Most importantly, as an insurance customer, they had saved me a considerable amount of money on my insurance policy. And so I was pleased. I was a satisfied customer for all intents and purposes, until I called Walker Insurance and I got one of their principals on the phone, and I said, "I'd love to come in with you I'd love to come in and sit down with you for 15 minutes and show you what I do." And his response was kind of similar to my dry cleaner, but his response was, "I'm sorry, we don't do that. We have a strict policy that we just don't do that with any of our customers." And he was reasonable about it. He said, if we did, you could imagine we'd be spending all of our time just listening to our customers. I said, well, and in my mind, I said, I don't think that listening to your customers is a bad way to spend your time. But I again made it clear that was fine, and I respected that, but that I expect to do business with people that do business with me. And when he was unwilling to budge, he said, "I'm sorry, sir, that's our strict policy. We don't change it." I said, "Okay, that's no problem." And I went and found myself another insurance broker who was willing to sit down with me, and who, by the way, did buy the membership. And don't be afraid to have that confidence. Again, a lot of it's just going to be in your posture. You don't have to threaten people, but you can let them know that you expect to at least be able to show them what you do. And if they're not willing to give you that time, don't be afraid to take your business to somebody who will. Okay? That's when it comes to following your dollar. I like these last two because, again, they may not be as effective, but this is a way to get at least a lead, and it would be warmer than just cold calling a company. But who do you know that works at a locally based company? Or who do you know that works for any company? Because, again, even if they're long distance, you might still try to call them and set up a web presentation with them. I used this example earlier, but if your neighbor works for ABC Company, you could ask your neighbor who handles HR there, who handles benefits decisions, who might handle that. And your neighbor might say, "Well, that's Dolores, and you need to go talk to her." And your neighbor might even say, "Do you want me to send her an email, let her know that you're going to be calling, or, could I help you with anything?" Or your neighbor, frankly, might say, "I would appreciate it if you don't mention me because I just started there and I'm not trying to ruffle any feathers." That's fine. and in which case it wouldn't be a warm market. But most of the time, if you ask your neighbor for help, they're going to be willing to help, or a friend or a church member or whoever it is. So as you go down through your cell phone contacts, where do they work? Where do they work? Where do they work? And don't be afraid to use those 4 powerful words. Will you help me? Because if you ask for their help, most people, if you know them, are going to be willing to help. At least give you a name. And again, it's just a little bit warmer when you're able to call that HR person, for example, and say, hey, Jimmy, your employee who works for you, that's my next door neighbor. He actually had given me your name, and I just wanted to reach out to you. That's going to be a little bit warmer than calling just as a cold call. So again, I'm not against cold calls in any way, but I'm trying to show you how to build a list of contacts using your warm market. Here's another big one, LinkedIn. Who can you connect with on LinkedIn? Use this great resource that is connecting business people from all walks of life to connect with a few people. Who do you know who's a common contact? And maybe you mention that when you're prospecting them on the phone. We talked about this already, but Joe Girard is the guy on your screen there. He's the greatest car salesman in the world. And what made him so great is he was so good at getting referrals. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but he sold more cars than anybody else. I mean, this guy was selling just thousands and thousands of cars. He would attribute that to handwritten notes that he would write, and the extra time and attention that he would spend would always get him referrals. And he built a book of business based on just getting referrals. And so who can give you a referral? And the answer is everybody. We talked about this on the call this morning. Even if they say yes, even if they say no, they can still give you a referral. If you sit down with a decision maker, don't leave their office without asking for some referrals. I love this question. Who else do you know that could benefit from this information? Again, I like how Alistair Edwards said it this morning. Who do you know that would say yes? Who do you know that would let me come talk to their employees? One powerful phrase that I want to teach you, and it's not so much that I'm teaching you the phrase as it is the practice. But when someone starts to give you a referral, and again, most of the time this will be because you asked for that referral. Sometimes, though, a decision maker or even an employee at a company, they'll just start giving you referrals. They'll say, you know who you ought to go talk to is John Smith over at XYZ company. So regardless of whether you ask for it or whether they're just volunteering that information, when someone starts to give you a referral, I want you to listen to me on this. When someone starts to give you a referral, remember this phrase. Hey, let me write that down. Or do you mind if I jot this down? One of the greatest compliments, someone taught me this when I was very new in the business. One of the greatest compliments that you can give someone is to write down what they're saying. It shows massive respect. And people are not offended. In fact, it's the exact opposite. When you pause and say, would you mind if I write this down? It does not offend. It's the exact opposite. They love it. It's a compliment, and people take it as that. When someone is giving you something as valuable as a referral, please do not rely on your memory to track that. Take out something, and maybe you just have to punch it in your phone if you don't have a pen and paper, but take out something and say, would you mind if I make a note of this? Would you mind if I write this down? And you watch what happens. When someone's giving you a referral and you ask their permission, can I write this down? And then you start writing down, you just watch what happens. 9 times out of 10, they're going to keep giving you more referrals. They're going to say, I'll tell you who else you got to talk to is Cindy over at Johnson Medical, or Tabitha over at such and such company. They'll just get going. They'll start giving. They will give you multiple referrals, in part because you're showing that you're serious enough about about receiving those that you're taking the time to write them down. That simple practice, this is not brain surgery, that simple practice can double or even triple or even quadruple the number of referrals that you get from each source. Just taking the time and making emphasize, making a point of it. And how do you do that? You just say, "Do you mind if I write this down? This is very helpful." You just watch. They'll just keep on giving you. Versus, let me tell you what I've seen. I've seen this in field training. Decision maker gives the associate a referral, tell you who you ought to call. You ought to call John Smith over at XYZ. And they say, "Okay, I will definitely do that." And they don't write it down. They just rely on their memory. Now, they may not forget. I'm not questioning their memory. But here's what the person that's giving the referral does. They stop. And that's it. And they don't give you any more. You're not even serious enough that you're writing it down. And again, I don't know that that's conscious on their part. I think that it's probably subconscious. But it is the truth, y'all. When you write down the referrals that you get, you will end up with so much more. Let's quickly just cover some of these cold market lead sources. So, okay, you get your warm market leads. I want you to get that list as big as you possibly can, but then here's the question. What if you need to supplement that? What if you say, I really want to get 100 leads in my pipeline, and I can only come up with 40 warm market? Well, let's supplement the other 60 with some cold market. I don't want you to just sit there and not do anything. And I think 100, by the way, is a good number to shoot for. Now, some of you have more than 100 right now, and that's fine. But I think that 100 would be a good number to shoot for. And so how do you supplement that? Well, cold market Reference USA is one of my favorite resources to use. How do you get access to Reference USA? You do it through your library. You can pay for it, but it's expensive. Your library probably already has a subscription. And if they don't, you might have to call the neighboring town library, or you don't have to drive to all those places. Just call around until you find someone who does. My library did not, for example, so I found a city that was about 45 minutes away that theirs did offer Reference USA. I did have to go there one time and get a library card, and I think it was like $10 to get the library card because my address was not in their city. But I paid $10 and boom, now I've got I had access to Reference USA. That was a great investment of my time. Reference USA is great because it really can break down by zip code, by street. You can get super specific. If you say, I want to see construction companies in this zip code, it'll show you. If you want to sort those by the street name, because you're planning on going out in person and contacting them and you want to hit all the same ones on the same street, it'll do that for you as well. It'll typically give you the name of a decision maker. It'll tell you who's in HR, who's the owner, versus just the name and phone number, which you might find from Google or yellowpages.com, for example. So I like Reference USA for finding cold market leads. Is it the only resource? No, of course not. Manta is free. It's online. It's not as robust as Reference USA, but it'll give you some good information. Just Googling companies is a way to get some good information as well. I mean, that's not difficult. Look for when you're passing a truck and there's a phone number on the truck. That's a sign that they've got employees because one of those employees is driving that truck. Look for signs, look for ads that have phone numbers. All of these are ways to build cold market leads. Yellowpages.com, and again, when you come out of a company, just turn to your left, turn to your right. There's going to be companies that you can go call on. Another thing that I like about Reference USA is you can put in there, I only want companies that are 20 employees and more or 10 employees and more. And that way you limit some of the time that you might spend on companies that you get in, they only have 2 people. Of course, now with self-pay, you can open it up with two people. So maybe, but if I'm going to spend the time to go do a decision maker meeting, I'd rather spend that with a company that has 25 employees versus 3 employees. So, that might just be a way that I can protect my time. So to me, if you're going to do some cold market prospecting, I would highly recommend trying to find access to Reference USA. You could certainly do this without Reference USA, but it would be worth, calling around, taking 30 minutes, calling several libraries. You have to ask for their reference desk. That's usually who would know if they have access to Reference USA, but then just ask them, do you have a Reference USA or not? And if they do, boom. Now you just have to get a library card there, and usually the vast majority of them, you don't have to go into the library every time you want to use it too. You can use it from home through the library's website, but you might have to go in one time to get the library card. So that's just a way to get cold market lead sources. So what I want to do here is I want to pause for just a second, and I want to come out, and I've created a poll here. So if you go to kind of your webinar, I don't know what you call that, the little window that comes up for the webinar, I'm going to launch this poll, and the poll's real simple. It's just a question of how many leads do you have on your list right now? How many leads do you have on your list right now? I'm going to launch this poll, and it's real simple. And I'm talking about not floating around in your brain. I'm talking about how many of you sat down and made a list. And I'm gonna say, at least on this, do you have the name of the business and a phone number? Now, you may not have the name of the decision maker yet on all of these, and I'll talk about how to get that name here in just a second. But how many do you have? Do you have a list of leads? Maybe some of you, the answer is 0. But do you have a list of leads, and then how many leads do you have on that list? So I'm going to launch, let me select the poll, and I'm going to go ahead and launch that now. So that poll should now be open. I'm just going to give you a few seconds here. Go ahead and put in your answer. It's either 0, 1 to 10, 10 to 30, 30 to 100, or do you have over 100? I see everybody participating in this. The numbers are going up. That's great. That's great. I'm really doing this just to kind of get an idea of how many, what are we looking at here? What are we looking at here? I'm going to give you about 5 or 10 more seconds just for those of you who have not answered yet. It's just one question. You just have to select one of those. Go ahead and answer if you haven't yet. Okay, so here are our results from this poll. 14% say 0. So 14% of you have said that you don't have any leads yet. And you know what? Maybe you're brand new. Maybe you just haven't taken time to do that. What's your job, you think, as soon as we hang up the phone here? Start making that list. Let's get that list going. Another 14% of you, and by the way, most of you voted, which is great. So another 14% say that you've got between 1 and 10. So I'm going to challenge you. You need to get that number up, because one, even if it's 10, that's not enough that's not a pipeline. That's too few. And we're talking total business, so warm and cold combined. But you're going to need to increase that. 28% of you, that's the biggest percentage, 28% of you say that you have between 10 and 30. And I want to say, good job that you've got a good start going, but it's only a start. I would really challenge you to double, triple, quadruple that list. I would, in fact, really challenge you to add to it until you get to about 100. 100 is a very healthy pipeline. And 26% of you said that you have between 30 and 100, and 19% of you said that you have over 100. So, to me, that's good. That means that about half of you are either between 30 and 100 or over 100, and I think that's a decent place to be today. My challenge for each of you, regardless of where you're at, is to get to 100. Let's get you to 100, and maybe some of you will need to get over 100. That depending on your goals, that may be the case. And we'll talk about that here in just a second as well. So, but thank you for participating in that, and I like that. It gives us a bird's eye view of where folks are at, and hopefully it gives you, and of course that's totally not confidential, but I don't know who's saying what. I mean, I don't know, but you know who you are, and you know where you are right now, and you know what you need to do. Whether you have 0 or 10 or 30 or 100, you know what you need to do as far as building that list. Now, here are some questions that we might ask in working your list. So again, how many calls am I going to make in a day? That goes back to those action statements, and really it goes back to your action plan that you have set for yourself. But if if your goals, for example, call for 200 calls a week, are you going to do that 40 a day for 5 days? Are you going to do 50 a day for 4 days? Are you going to make, 75 calls for 2 days and then 50 a third? I mean, how are you going to break that down? You need to know that. You need to know what this week is going to look like. And again, kind of goes back to organizing that weekly schedule. Question number 2 here is what I just alluded to. How often should I call a prospect? And the size of your pipeline is really determined by these first 2 questions, right? So if you say, for example, I want to make 50 calls a day, I'm just kind of using a number here, but if you say I need to make 50 calls a day, and I want to call my prospects every 3rd day, because I don't recommend that you call them every day. I don't think you ought to call the same person Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because that's overkill. And all of a sudden you got somebody who was on vacation last week, they get back, they got 6 voicemails from you, and it looks a little too needy at that point. There's a fine line between urgency and neediness, being needy, and every day you're crossing that line. You could make an argument for every other day, but maybe every 3rd day is a good number to shoot for. You're going to make that decision. But if I say I'm going to make 50 calls a day, and I want to call my leads every 3rd day, my pipeline needs to be at least 150 companies. And because I'm going to go through the first 50 today, I'm going to go through the second 50 tomorrow, and the third 50 on Wednesday. But by Thursday, I'm going to come back to that first 50. Now I'll continue to need to add to that pipeline as well, because Thursday, when I come back to those 50 that I called today, some of them I've talked to, they've said no. Some of them the number was out of order or whatever. So maybe I've got 43 of those 50 left. 43 of them I basically left voicemails with on Monday. So when I come back to that list on Thursday, I need to get 7 more on there to get back up to my 50. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So anyway, how many calls in a day should I make? How often should I call a prospect? Those are both questions that are going to be specific to you. I would say every 2 or 3 days is good. You could do every week too, but I don't think there's anything wrong with calling a prospect a couple times in a week. I think that's totally fine. How many times should I call a prospect before giving up? Now, that is a great question. And I mentioned that earlier. You're going to call the same companies. And if you've not spoken to them yet, then that's a new call. So that's income producing activity for sure. When you're calling a company that you've just left a voicemail for, but you've not spoken to the person, you haven't set a decision maker meeting up yet, that's not follow-up. That's just prospecting. So is that clear? I want to be really clear on that. If you're calling a company, I don't care if it's the 10th or 15th time that you've called them, if you've never gotten through, if you've never spoken to the person, that's not a follow-up. That's just prospecting. And that is absolutely income-producing activity. Versus if you're calling a decision maker that you met with last week, that's follow-up. And you could argue that that's income-producing activity, but again, I like the definition of income-producing activity as telling the message to somebody that's not heard it before. And you need to have a significant amount of both income-producing activity and obviously following up with those decision makers that you've already met with. You got to budget time for both. But that's the difference there. To answer the question, how many times should I call a prospect before giving up? I don't have a concrete number there. I mean, 10, 15, 20. Now, if they tell you no, that's a different story. But I'm talking about you've left voicemails you've never been able to get through to a person. Some people have the attitude, I'm just not going to stop. I mean, if I just keep leaving voicemails, I'm just going to keep on going. I know this. The vast majority of appointments that you will set, hear me on this, please. The vast majority of appointments that you will set will come on or after the first call. So to think that you called the company and left a voicemail means nothing. I mean, seriously. Because the vast majority will be at least on the second phone call. And I would even go so far as to say that the majority are going to be on the fourth or fifth phone call and beyond. Why is that? I don't know. I really don't know, except for that persistence is a big part of our business. Now, I will say this, make sure that your voicemails are not you doing basically a presentation on a voicemail, okay? So I remember I was field training a guy one time, and I listened to him leave a voicemail, and it was like a 3-minute voicemail. He was getting into the whole presentation on the voicemail. I'm like, there is nobody that's going to listen to that and then either A, call you back, or B, pick up the phone the next time they see your number. I mean, in fact, the opposite will be probably true. They will avoid you now because you just left them way too much information on your voicemail. So I don't know how much is perfect. I know different people feel different ways. My voicemail, my favorite voicemail message that I like to leave is, "This is Mike Riches. My number is 214-295-4900. Could you call me back? I've got a quick question for you, and I'm done." I don't say the name of the company. I don't really say anything about what we do. Now, I might leave that 4 or 5 or 6 times and then maybe switch it up a little bit to, I just wanted to visit with you regarding identity theft. Or I need to ask you a question regarding identity theft. Maybe I add that at that point. Which, by the way, when I say I've got a question to ask you, some people say, well, what if they call back? What's the question? Number one, I would love for them to call back. Most will not. I know that. I'm not leaving that voicemail so that they call back. I'm leaving that voicemail so that the 4th or 5th time that they see my number come up on their caller ID, they say, that's the guy that keeps leaving that voicemail. Let me just take the call. That's the reason I leave that voicemail. But if they do call me back, which some may, if they do call me back, what's the question? The question's real simple. Next Wednesday at 9 o'clock, can I come meet with you? That's my question. And I'm going to get into my script. I'll do the same script that I would do when they call back. I'll do the same script that I would do if I got them on the phone. And I'll talk about that script here in a little bit. But my question is the same question. Next Wednesday at 9:30, are you free? Can we meet? And then I like this 4th one. Again, I alluded to this a minute ago. How often should I set aside time to add leads to my list? I think weekly is a positive thing, because if you're really prospecting a list, if you make 50 calls, you're going to get 5 or 10 that you're going to have to take off your list. Either you get the decision maker on the phone and they tell you no, or many of them don't tell you no, but they say, right now is not a good time, or I don't think I'd be interested. And you might come back with, well, would you mind if I kept you informed of things that we're doing, or would you mind if I followed up, and what would be a better time for me to follow up? When would be a good time? Could I call you after the first of the year? So maybe you put that company in your tickler file until the first of the year, or until they tell you that it would be a good time. But whether it's that, or they tell you never call me again, I hate you, and you're the scum of the earth. I don't, some people get a little ugly on that. I'm probably exaggerating there a little bit, but it doesn't really matter. I'm still going to take them out of my active pipeline, and I'll need to replace them. So I think it's a good idea to set aside time, and that might be 10 minutes a week or 15 minutes a week. It doesn't need to be a long time. By the way, if you're taking more than an hour to build your list to 100, I think that you're taking too much time. You're not being serious enough. That's something that you can add names to a list pretty fast. But if you set aside 15 minutes a week to 10 or 15 minutes a week to add additional names, maybe from Reference USA, to your list, then that's totally fine. I think that that's totally reasonable. When it comes to prospecting these companies, and maybe we'll just pause here for a second, let everybody kind of take a deep breath, because I know I'm covering a lot of information. Take a deep breath, and then we'll dive into this, because I want to talk about prospecting over the phone and in person. That is an age-old debate. I don't even know that debate's the right word, but question that we get is, which is better? Is it better to prospect over the phone, or is it better to prospect in person? And my answer is always the same: yes. Both are good. They're both fine. I do think that there's value in focusing primarily on either the phone or in person. You can do both, and some people like to do both just to kind of mix it up a little bit. But I think that there's value in doing something long enough and just enough that you can start to develop a rhythm, that you can really perfect that skill. So if you're brand new and you don't have a lot of money to go out and buy gifts, for example, maybe the phone is the place for you to start. And why don't you do the phone for a few weeks and really develop that skill and get to the point where you really are getting into a rhythm, and then maybe you try branching out and doing some in person. Or maybe you're primarily prospecting on the phone, but like we talked about earlier, you say, every time I do a decision maker meeting, I'm going to prospect in person, 5 to my left and 5 to my right. That's a great way to supplement it. And I think that's totally fine. But I think that there's wisdom in having a default, in having one that's kind of your go-to prospecting. For me, that was always in person, and I spent a lot of money on mugs and a lot of money on chocolate. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I spent a lot of money on gifts that I was giving out in person, and it worked. It worked fine. And again, if you're not in a position to do that, maybe the phone is a better option for you. I'm going to talk about both of them here in our training, but I would really encourage you to have kind of one that is your go-to, that's your default prospecting method. Maybe that's in person, but you say, you know what, on days that it's raining, I'm going to do it over the phone. And so my default is in person, but I've got a backup that I can go over the phone, whatever that looks like for you. If you're prospecting over the phone, if that's going to be your default, if that's going to be your primary method of prospecting, let me just share these tips with you. Number one, have a goal for how many calls that you're going to make, and don't stop until you've hit that goal. Be real careful about giving yourself a break, during that time. I'm not saying that you can't, but don't be afraid to be a tough boss on yourself. That's one beautiful thing about this business is you don't have a boss. When you look at customer service people that are working in a call center, for example, CSRs, they have a boss, and they have a boss that's looking at their volume. They have a boss that's looking at how many phone calls they take. They are looking at the time spent on every phone call. If that person has to take a break and go to the bathroom, the boss is looking to see how long they take to get back. I mean, they have a boss. Well, the disadvantage of that is nobody really likes having a boss, or at least most people don't enjoy that. Somebody that's always on top of you, always looking over your shoulder. That's typically not a positive thing for anybody. However, the advantage of having a boss is we tend to do more activity when there's accountability involved. And what I'm saying to you is, you're not going to have a boss in this business. Now, we're going to talk today about creating some accountability, but you're not ever going to have a boss in this business. You're never going to have someone that calls you at the end of the day and says, hey, did you make the calls or did you not? And if you didn't, you're out. You're fired. You're done. You're not going to have that in this business. So you've got to be a tough boss on yourself. And maybe for some of you that looks like, look, I've got 3 hours that I'm going to prospect. I will give myself a 5-minute break halfway through to go get a drink, go stretch, use the restroom, and then I'm right back on the phone. But don't be afraid to be a tough boss on yourself. And by the way, if your goal is 50 calls, Don't stop until you've hit that goal. Maybe that's 3 hours and 10 minutes. Maybe that, if you've structured it in a way that it's reasonable, it shouldn't be much over that time. But if you get to that 3-hour mark and you're at 47, by all means, you better make 3 more calls. Be a tough boss on yourself. Don't let yourself off early. In jobs that you've had in the past, you wouldn't have quit. You wouldn't have quit early. You wouldn't have given up early, because maybe some of you have had a job where you had a boss. And so if you worked hard, if you did something building somebody else's fortune, at least have the same discipline in building your own fortune, please. Tip number 2 here: use a tracking system. Something that allows you to make quick notes on each call. Now, that might be on paper for some of you. That might be using the CMS tool that we have for some of you. For some of you, maybe you've got a third-party CMS that you just really have fallen in love with and want to use. That's fine. For some of you, maybe that's Google Docs. I've had a lot of people that use Google Docs to sit there and track. But make a quick note at the end of each call. That note should be super fast, such as left message, today's date. And I always do LM for left message. I don't even type all that out. LM 8/12/2019. Boom, I'm on to my next call. Sometimes I can make that while the next call is ringing if I want to be real aggressive. LM, left message, 8/12/2019. Maybe LMWP, left message with person, if you left it with like the receptionist, not a voicemail. Or you could do VM for voicemail, 8/12/19. But just a quick note, or no interest, or call back in January, or no answer, or set an appointment for Wednesday. That note takes a little bit longer to make, and you need to add it to your calendar, and maybe you send an Outlook meeting request right then when you hang up the phone. But it's okay. It's okay to take 3 or 4 minutes to do that. Because it's worth it, because you got an appointment. So that's good. And I hope that you're doing that 2 or 3 times every time you sit down and make calls. Even if you do it once, it's worth taking that time. But use that tracking. Use whatever tracking system is going to work for you. I would recommend that you have something that gives you the ability to set yourself reminders. So when they say, I need you to call me back next, if you can call me back at 3 o'clock this afternoon, I'll have time then. Something, even that, again, that might be a Google Calendar, that might be, your CSM, something that's going to pop up as a reminder at 3 o'clock for you to call them back. This third note: be comfortable and professional. When you first start making calls, I'm talking to our new people here, or to our people that have been around for a while but need to act like new people, because you're going to get into activity mode more than you ever have before. But when you first start making calls, you're not going to be very comfortable. That's okay. I'm not saying be comfortable as in go put sweatpants on. That's the professional part. I'm a big fan of, especially in the beginning, if you're going to make calls, get dressed, shower, be professional, shave, gentlemen. If you shave normally, then shave to make calls. In other words, getting into a professional dress and appearance helps you be more professional on the phone. But be comfortable. You've got to relax a little bit. I know sometimes that's hard when you're paying bills. Depends on how these phone calls go. I know it's hard to relax. But if you're uptight and you're nervous, that nervous energy is going to come through the phone. And it's going to affect whether you get appointments or not. So try to relax. Get some essential oils going in the background and get you relaxed. I don't know what you need to do, but relax and smile when you're on the phone. Use high energy. Expect to make an appointment on every call. That's the tough thing about sitting down and making 50 phone calls, is when you get halfway through those 50 calls, you tend to expect that it's going to be a voicemail. And it's almost like it catches you off guard when the decision maker does answer. And you're like, yes, my name is Mike Rich's. You need to expect every phone call to get a yes. Every phone call, you ought to expect that decision maker to answer the call and to say yes. That's what's going to keep you ready. Most of the time you'll be wrong, and that's okay. But the times that you'll be right because you were expecting it. And then this final point here on making phone calls, look, number one, you need to make sure that call quality is very high. The second part of that, don't be afraid to invest in a landline. I've learned this. When you're talking on a cell phone, most of the time that quality is not very high. There's typically some kind of a delay. What's happening is your voice is going digital, versus an analog line. Don't be afraid to invest in a landline. I mean, really. I mean, if it's a high quality voice over IP, maybe that works, because I think being on a regular phone is better than a cell phone, even if it is a voice over IP line. Please don't get one of those $5 a year voice over IPs. Those do not. That's worse call quality than a cell phone. But don't be afraid to invest in a landline. I pay $70 a month for my landline. And that's just a cost of doing business. Now, you could maybe get one for cheaper than that, but I wanted an actual landline like we had 20 years ago that's coming into my house, because that is what I have found gives me the clearest call quality. And what I've learned is when you get that decision maker on the phone, the quality of the call is synonymous to, if you were in person, the firmness of your grip when you're shaking hands. I just want you to think about that. How many of you have ever shaken hands with someone where they had that dead fish handshake? And no matter how sharp they are, how intelligent they are, they might be a wonderful person, but when you shake a dead fish handshake, when you shake hands with somebody like that, you immediately formulate opinions about that person. And what I'm saying to you is the quality of your phone call is very much like that. When they get you on the phone and it's like this, it sounds like you're far away and there's a little bit choppiness going on, and you're, hey, my name is Mike with LegalShield at ID Shield. It's like a dead fish handshake. And they're going to immediately formulate opinions, and a lot of them will just say no right off the bat. So, the way I figure it is this. I'm talking about a business here that I'm building a business that's going to earn a six-figure income. $50 a month to get a landline is not a bad investment in that. If you're going to be prospecting over the phone every day, and I would add there, look at the lady on the picture there, go get yourself a good quality headset too, because that'll help. Just be more comfortable. Don't be afraid to invest a few bucks in something that is going to make that experience more positive. And the way I look at it is this: if you're spending $50 a month for a landline, or if you have to go spend $20 on a headset, the headset's more just for your comfort. But if you have to spend the $50 a month on a landline, if you end up getting one decision maker a month that says yes where they might not have paid as much attention because if you had a choppy line, if you get one more yes a month, that is well worth your $50 investment. Really, if you got one a year, you could make the argument that that's worth your $50 investment, one additional yes a year. But I think it's going to be closer to one or more additional yeses every month by having a clear, high-quality call. And again, I don't know of a better way to get that than a landline. Now, you could maybe invest in like a business voice over IP system, but I think that would be probably more expensive than a landline. Let's talk in-person prospecting. We're coming down the finish line here, but let's talk. If your default is to go out in person and prospect, what should you do there? Well, I'm a big believer in doing a verification call the day before. And what that means is that I take 30 seconds, this is not a long call, the day before, and just call, and here's my script on that. I don't have it on the screen, but I'll just give it to you. It's very simple. If I am going to go to John Smith as the decision maker, that's the name that I have. And John Smith is that decision maker, and I'm going to go drop off drop off a gift tomorrow to John Smith, I will call that company today, this afternoon. I'll take 30 minutes and make 20 calls. These are very quick. And when the receptionist answers, all I'm going to say is, hey, this is Mike Riches. I've got a gift that I need to drop off to John Smith. Is your address still 123 Main Street? And that's what I'm asking. And that's all. And here's what that's going to do now is if I say, is your address still 123 Main Street? I've got a gift to drop off to John Smith. Is your address still 123 Main Street? Number one, if they've moved, I want to know that. and that's not very common. And I've got their address from, again, Reference USA or Google, or I've looked it up on their website or whatever. But if they've moved, I want to know that for sure. Number two, if John Smith is not my guy, if he's moved, I don't have to ask that. All I have to say is I've got a gift to drop off for John Smith. Is your address still 123 Main Street? But here's what they would say is, that's our address, but John Smith doesn't work here anymore. He's been gone for 6 months. And then it's real simple. Oh, who took his place? Is that yourself? And now I've got the right name. Again, that is so much better for me to know that, though, the day before I go and find that out on the phone than to walk in with a mug of chocolate. I've got a gift for John Smith. Well, they don't work here anymore. Then I got egg on my face, and it doesn't look as good. The other thing that would verify is if he's out, if John Smith is like on vacation this whole week, then they typically would say that as well. Again, I don't necessarily have to ask that. All I have to say is, I got a gift for John Smith. Is the address still 123 Main Street? But if he's gone all week, they would typically say, that's our address, but he's on vacation this whole week. And I might be looking for, something like that. So again, that it takes 30 seconds to have that conversation. And I can hang up right to the next call. But what I'm doing is I'm going to call 30 companies, because out of 30, my goal is to find 20 to 25 that I can verify, and then my prospecting in person the next day is so much more worthwhile. Now, I've got to budget that 30 minutes to make verification calls, but I'm telling you that I've found that 30 minutes is worthwhile. It's worth taking that time and doing that in advance of my prospecting in person. Okay, I've got to have the right supplies when I'm prospecting in person. I told you earlier the mugs of good candy are what I always use. That's the system my brother taught me. That's the system I taught a lot of people, is go get you some mugs, go get you some Hershey's Nuggets. Don't buy cheap candy. Nobody wants Smarties or M&Ms. Get some good, Hershey's Nuggets or Lindt Lindor truffles work as well. Even Ghirardelli could work. But something that when you have it in your hand and you walk up to that receptionist and you say, hey, is John in? And they say, do you have an appointment? I say, no, I just got a gift to drop off. Something that the receptionist looks at it and is like, that's a nice gift. I'd like to have one of those myself. And maybe in a case where I set the appointment, maybe I'll give the receptionist a gift. You never know. But I like those mugs with candy in them. That was always the question. How many people did you mug today? The answer to that question, although it sounds kind of silly, but the answer to how many people did you really prospect today had everything to do with how many groups we were going to open and how much money we were going to make. Make sure you've got your calendar. Again, are you using a paper calendar? Are you using it on your phone? Make sure you have that ready to access. I remember when I first switched over to using my phone, I just wasn't real good at it yet. It was my first smartphone that I had, but I wanted to use an electronic calendar. I remember there were a couple times where I'd be prospecting and they'd say, yeah, why don't you come in next Tuesday? And I'd pull up. It wouldn't even be the calendar app. I'd have the phone up, the phone app up, and I would just be pretending to punch it in. And next Tuesday at 3 o'clock. Okay, I got you down. And then I'd go out in my car and I'd actually take time to pull up the calendar and put it in there for the right time. But anyway, I'm not recommending that. But whatever calendar you're going to use, do you have business cards? That's what you would do with a mug of chocolate, is you'd put the card in the mug. And then I always say, if you're prospecting in person, one thing about it is you will have some decision makers that say, oh, I have 15 minutes right now. And so I don't necessarily bring my DM packet that I'm going to use in the meeting. I don't bring that in with me when I'm prospecting. I might leave it in the car because I found that when I'm prospecting, all I really want to do is have my calendar, which again, that might be on my phone, and the mug of chocolates, and that's it. Otherwise, it looks too much like you're a salesperson. So, but I have those supplies for the DM meeting in the car ready to go, because if the decision maker says, well, I've got 15 minutes right now, I'll say, great, let me just grab my information and we'll sit down. So I'm always ready for that. My next bullet point, I'm kind of moving through these because I want to definitely stick to our time this morning, but my next bullet point here is to stay organized. Use technology. Again, that Reference USA sorting. If I'm going to be prospecting in person, I can pull up doctor's offices in this zip code, and then all the one, if I sort them by street address, all the ones on Main Street are going to come up at the same time, one after each other in my list. Road Warrior is a great app that you can put addresses in, and it will develop a route. It'll tell you which route to go on that will be the most efficient. Use that technology. And then this final point here, starting at the top, that's for those companies where you might have two names. Maybe you have the business owner and the HR person. And I always ask for the business owner first. And if I get that look like I am not calling the big boss down here, and they don't say that, but their face says it. What they say is, do you have an appointment? If I go in and I say, is John in? John's the owner. Do you have an appointment? And I can kind of see it on their face. John's the big boss. Then I'll say, well, how about Richard? Richard's the HR person. How about Richard? Is he in? And then it's so funny because it's like this look of relief comes over them. They're like, oh, good. I'd much rather call Richard. And they say, oh, yeah, let me get him up here. And they call him, and Richard comes up. And so I've learned that kind of starting at the top, and then always be ready. If you have two names, always be ready to go to that second name if necessary. In closing here, the two skills that I just want to close with are really the two skills that you have to develop in prospecting. And they're pretty simple. One, you've got to get to the decision maker. You've got to get past that gatekeeper, in other words. And this is the case whether you're prospecting in person or over the phone. And then the second skill is you got to set up an appointment. Those are your two skills. So let's talk about each of those. Here are just a few tips on getting to more decision makers. What happens if you don't have a name? So this is something to think about. If you pull on Reference USA, or sometimes there's not a name there. Or what happens when you're driving down the road and you see ABC Trucking, a big truck next to you, and you jot down that name and number. I was riding with my son the other day, and we were passing a truck. I said, hey, take a picture of that truck. I want to get that name and number. Well, in those cases, you might not have a name. You could always jump on their website, just take 30 seconds to see if you can find a name. But again, I would hesitate spending too much time on that, because if you spend 10 minutes on each company, there's no way you're going to make 50 calls in a day. And we're talking about cold calling here. So what if you don't have a name? It's real simple. Just call the person or call the company. When the receptionist gets on the phone, here's my line there. And it's going to be those last three words that you see on the screen. If I don't have a name, I'm going to call and I'm going to say, hey, I'm looking for the person that handles benefits. Is that yourself? Same with if you have the wrong name. What happens when you get a name off of Reference USA, David Johnson, but then you call them and they say, well, David Johnson hasn't worked here in 6 months. Oh, do you know who took his place? Is that yourself? I don't know what it is about those last three words. Is that yourself? I don't know what it is about those words. I think it changes the dynamic of it versus saying, who is that person? That's when you get a lot of the, well, I'm not allowed to give out that information, or they'll start asking, now, who are you again? But when you say, is that yourself, it just changes the dynamic, and all of a sudden they're like, no, that's not me. That's Susan. That's Sandra that you need to talk to. And again, that's not going to work 100% of the time, but I've just learned adding those three words at the end of your question who took his place, or who is it that handles benefits? Is that yourself? It just can make a big difference. So what about when you get that decision maker on the phone? What can you do to make the most appointments here? And this is, I got two more slides here, and then we're going to get into our assignment. So we're good on time. But what do you do when you get that decision maker on the phone? Well, I think a big part of it is knowing what you're going to say. So get a script. Now, I love my identity theft education script. It's the one that I like to use. So if I'm calling and prospecting, I would say, or I'd get David on the phone. I'd say, hey, David, this is Mike Riches. Hey, listen, I wanted to call you. I'm with LegalShield. We're the company that's doing the identity theft workshops with a lot of different construction companies or medical offices or whatever kind of company David Johnson has. We're the company that's doing the identity theft workshops with a lot of different construction companies in town. And I've been assigned to come meet with you for about 15 minutes and bring you some information. Now, I've got to be in your area next Wednesday at 10 a.m. I've got to be down the road at XYZ Construction. I was going to see if maybe 9:30 would work for you. Would 9:30 be okay for you next Wednesday? That's my quick identity theft workshop script that I like to use. Other people have a different script, and that's fine. You've got to find what works for you. But at the end of the day, don't just wing it. Don't just, expect to get them on the phone and then just go for it, off the cuff. Know what you're going to say. Now, I'm not saying that you need to sit there and read it. Hello, David. My name is Mike Riches with LegalShield, and we are the company that is doing the identity theft workshops. I mean, if you read it, they're going to be able to tell that too. So know what you're going to say. Practice it. Get comfortable. Of course, the best way to learn your script is just make a bunch of calls, and you'll learn it. You'll develop it, and you'll tweak it as you go along as well. You'll say, I'm not going to say that next time. I'm going to tweak it. I'm going to change this a little bit. You'll find something that works for you. Notice I use that phrase, I've been assigned. I like that. You can be assumptive with it. I told that to one group, and somebody said, well, I don't want to be dishonest. I don't want to say I've been assigned if I haven't been assigned. And I said, and I'll say this to you this morning, I hereby assign you to call on every company in North America. So now you can speak with confidence in saying that you have been assigned. As your trainer today, I hereby assign that to you. So, but what that is it's posture. And that's really what this is about, is just assuming that you're supposed to do this, that you are going to sit down with them. And that has to do with asking the right question as well. Notice the question that I asked in my sample script there. It's not, are you interested, or do you have time? Because the truth is, they're probably not interested. And if they work in HR, or if they're a decision maker, they definitely don't have time. They got 50 other things that they're worried about. So the answer to both of those is probably no. My question is, next Wednesday at 9:30, does that work for you in your schedule? I'm a big believer in the right question is going to have to do in some way, shape, or form with their calendar. Now, people ask it different ways. They say, 9:30 next Wednesday, does that work for you? Or what would work better, 9:30 or 10, or 2:30 in the afternoon? Or is next Wednesday a better day? Or next Thursday work better? I mean, but it's something getting them to think about their schedule is where I want to get with this. And then let me just share with you, again, some general prospecting tips. Again, whether you're on phone or you're in person, I would just say review your scripts. Again, find something that's going to work for you. Now, I mentioned earlier that we were going to talk about accountability. One of the great things about being able to do this advanced training together is that we set it up to where you can have some accountability for the next 6 weeks. That we're doing this training together. And so I'm going to invite you to go to reportmyactivity.com, and that's the site that we're going to use to report activity for the next 6 weeks that we're in this class together. And you can use that to report daily activity as far as prospecting. And that's what we're going to track. We're going to track the prospecting activity. That's the primary thing, because that, let's be honest, that's the number one thing that separates the winners and losers, the producers and the pretenders. It's, did you get out and prospect? Because at the end of the day, the numbers typically will take care of themselves. And if you do enough prospecting, you're going to get some decision maker meetings and you're going to do some enrollments. And so now, I'm not saying that that's not, that's the only skill that you need to worry about and the only thing that you need to do. We'll spend time over the next few weeks during this advanced training talking about how to do an effective decision maker meeting and how to do an effective enrollment. But ultimately, this is what we're going to track, and this is what I'm going to ask you to report on, is prospecting, because that's where it all begins. And frankly, for some people, that's where it all falls apart. They just are not doing the activity. It's just not going well. And so I'm going to ask you to report that every day at reportmyactivity.com. And I'll show you that here in just a second. And then work that list of leads that you have. Again, some of you, we would add a kind of a 1.5 here between number 1 and number 2, or maybe even before number 1, you need to increase your pipeline. Because some of you answered back that, you have less than 30. I would say you need to at least get to 30, but I would challenge all of you by the end of today or by the end of tomorrow to get to 100. Again, don't make that a bigger deal than it is. Get as many of those from your warm market as possible, and then get on Reference USA or Manta or Google or something and supplement that to where you get to 100 leads, even if some of them are cold leads. That's fine. And then, of course, you're going to work your list of leads, and as we talked about earlier, when I showed you kind of the example of the weekly schedule, to me, one of the most important things that you can budget time for is that prospecting every week. Now, let me take you to this reportmyactivity.com. Let's see here if I can get out. I'm going to go to Report My Activity. Actually, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up incognito, because if I'm logged in, then it will look different for me. So reportmyactivity.com. And there it comes up. Made me nervous when it said it could not be reached. Okay, reportmyactivity.com comes up here, and you'll see you just need to enter your name, enter your associate number, and then you'll pick the date that you're reporting activity for, and it's a drop down. So if I'm reporting activity for today, I just select today. Now you can either do this every day, or you can go back and do it for multiple days, but I want you to report for one day at a time. So if, for example, I get to Wednesday the 14th and I'm going on, I need to report for the 12th, 13th, and 14th, I would need to do this report 3 different times. It takes 30 seconds. It's not a long thing, but I want you to do it for each day. So let me just put an answer in here. 111111111. That's not really my associate number, by the way. And I'm reporting for today. I'm going to hit next. The second page that comes up is about warm market prospecting. So notice that up here at the top. That's warm market. And so how did I do my warm market prospecting today? I'm either going to put by phone, in person with a gift, or I did not do any today. And let's say that I did by phone. How many did you contact today? I'm going to say 5. What was your goal? My goal was 5. I met my goal. And how many decision makers did you speak with? I spoke with 2. And how many appointments did I set? Was 1. And I go right to my next. Did I do cold market? Now it's going to ask the same exact questions for cold market. And maybe today I did not do any cold market prospecting. So I'm going to leave those blank. And I'm going to submit my form. Boom, I'm done. If I need to go back and do another date, I can hit that again, and I'm right back and I'm reporting for another day. I mean, if it's me, folks, I would recommend that you report every day, that you just make it a habit at the end of the day to go on, take 30 seconds, fill out that report, reportmyactivity.com. That way you're not trying to track numbers over multiple days, and, it's not Friday and you're thinking back, how many calls did I make on Monday? Just report it at the end of each day. is probably the easiest. But if you miss it, you can go back and you can report for certain days. What I'm going to ask you to do, and I want you to hear me on this, I'm going to ask you to report your activity for every day throughout this entire training period. Even if your activity is zero. If you have a day, for example, that you go to a funeral and it takes your whole day and you just did not get any activity, that's fine. Just get on and put zero. The reason is we're going to take this, and after about 2 or 3 weeks, we can start to really identify some trends. But it only really works if we have a report for every day. So if you have a day where it's zero, I mean, I'm not recommending that you have a bunch of those days, but if you do, then just report it as zero. And that will help us as we go through and start to identify some of these trends. All righty. So let's go through our questions now. And I only left 3 minutes for questions. So, okay, I'm just reading through these here. Some of these we've already answered. I like it. And again, I will send out 2 things because some of you are asking for that script. I'll send out my prospecting script, and I'll send out the PDF of that weekly schedule. I'll just send that to everybody. Mike Scott, thank you for writing that. That's great. I mentioned Mike earlier talking about referrals, and he does just an excellent job. He wrote here, what he does is when he gets a referral, he sends them a handwritten thank you for that referral. And he says, I've gotten more referrals from sending that handwritten note, which I love. Again, Mike is really, really good at doing that. Lita Cross Gray talks about A to Z business directory. That's another one very similar to Reference USA that definitely works as well. Jim Ryman talks about going to your local Chamber of Commerce for referrals. Totally. And you can even get some of those on their website as well. They'll usually have a business listing on the website. Great question. Yvonne Jones asks about if you're not yet certified, should you still be making appointments? I would say if you've been through the online training, I think you're fine. You just need to get certified as quickly as possible. So find an upcoming certification and get that done ASAP. But if you've been through the videos, you may not have a check mark by your name, but I think you're trained and you're working with somebody like myself that can help sign off on a group if that had to happen before you got your certification. Obviously, we want you to get certified, right? So I'm not trying to shortcut that, but if you're working with somebody like myself, which you are, who is certified, I think that you're good to go ahead and start making calls. And she asked another question about, is this for B2B? Yeah, that's the whole topic here is B2B. I think a lot of the principles are the same if you're talking to individuals, but yes, what we're talking about here is for B2B. Let's see. Lita Cross Gray, great question. She's talking about now following up from a decision maker meeting. How often do you follow up with that person? And again, you want to be reasonable, you want to be professional. I think every decision maker meeting, I'm trying to close as many of those get an enrollment set up on the spot as possible, right? That's not going to happen all the time. In fact, my ratio is 25%. So 75% of the time, I'm not closing them on the spot. And I know that, and I'm expecting that, but that 75% of the time, it's not going to be closed on the spot, and I am going to follow up. Now, I will typically set a day for follow-up. I'll say, could I follow up with you next Tuesday? Would morning or afternoon be better? So it's almost kind of an appointment for follow-up. But then again, sometimes they join the witness protection program, and you call them that day. They don't answer. They don't call back. I might try another time later in that week or even the next day. If they don't answer the next day, maybe later that week. And then I might settle into kind of a 1 or 2 a week, once or twice a week that I'm following up with them. Remember, I like to follow up like Brian Fahili in person. If I try them once or twice on the phone and I don't get them, I'll try to go by in person. It's harder to say no to a set of eyeballs. I'll have something that I'm dropping off, some material or something that I'm dropping off in person to give me a reason to be there. I'm not just showing up like a creep. I've got a reason to be there, and but I'll probably try that in person on that second or third attempt. So hope that that's helpful. And by the way, she asked how often, but I'll just add, and I don't give up until I get them and they tell me no. I will continue to follow up. I know people get busy. One of the biggest mistakes associates make is they try to call a person 2, 3, 4, 5 times back, and they're joining the witness protection program. They can't get through to that person, and so they just give up. They say, here's what the associate says: they're just not interested anymore. I'm going to go ahead and assume they're not interested because they're not answering my call. And the reality is they probably are interested, but they're just busy. So don't give up. Don't stop calling until they tell you no. That's my advice. We're out of time here, so we've got a couple other questions about, what do we use for associate number? That's your LegalShield associate number. That's a 9-digit number that you'll need to put there for your LegalShield associate number. Nancy asked a great question about introducing perks. I don't want to take time on that this afternoon, but I will come to that next week. We can talk a little bit more in depth on that. But anyway, I want to respect your time, and I know that we scheduled this till 12:30 Central Time. Thank you all very, very much for taking some time today to join us here. I know we covered a lot. This is probably the most packed session that we're going to have in this 7 weeks. Is this week number 2, because we're getting into basically 2 steps of the 5. But this is crucial stuff, and this is really where it all rises and falls, is right here in prospecting. So I want to just highly encourage you to double down on your prospecting goals. Look at those prospecting goals. Ask yourself, do they need to be higher? Could I make them a little bit more? Could I do a little bit more? And then get in and do it. Just get in and go for the gold. I mean, just dive in. You can't let somebody telling you no affect you. You can't let, leaving 50 voicemails at a time affect you. You're looking for the yeses. That's the key. That's what you got to remember. And then, of course, remember to report that prospecting activity for every day at www.reportmyactivity.com. Just jot that down, keep it in front of you, and make sure that you were reporting that for every day. Y'all, thank you again so much for being on here. God bless every one of you. Thanks for plugging in and being so intent on taking your business seriously. I love that. I respect it about you. And again, I want to wish you the very, very best as we continue to move forward here. We'll see you next week on this training. Have a great one.